disappear. Because for the euthanasia movement to succeed, it is just as crucial to separate the notion of euthanasia from the notion of killing. So they're fostering what they call the right to die. The right to die. Now, be careful about the right to die. There is no right to die. Now, you've all had breakfast, and I don't want to say anything that upsets anyone, but I got news for you. The fact that you were born guarantees you're going to die. The U.S. Congress cannot give you extra rights. Not even this is a fact. I mean, this is biology. The fact that you're born guarantees you're going to. But it sounds pretty good. This is the age of entitlement. I'm entitled. You're entitled. Get online. Get on this. No, don't get on this line too quickly. Because it's about what they're trying to do is to take something that's really not pretty, but wrap it up. Use wrapping paper. That sounds more attractive. Because believe me, it is absolutely crucial to separate the notion of killing from the notion of euthanasia. Why? For the same reason they said back in 1970. Most people consider killing socially abhorrent, and as soon as you mention that word, most of us feel icky. Because it's not a nice thing, killing an old person. Okay. So you can see I have a thing about words, and that's why I say your words have to be careful. But the same thing has to be true here. Make sure that what we're talking about actually involves, you're going to hear a lot of reference to artificial nutrition and artificial hydration. Well, first of all, there is no such thing as artificial hydration. What's hydration? Water. Water. Okay? Now it's true, in medicine, every now and then you have to up your vocabulary with some Greek words and some Latin words. This is normal. But, I mean, the one thing New York City probably did right was its water system. Now, the water's up there in the Delaware, it's up in the Ashokan, it goes through two of those tunnels. Two of the aqueducts go under the Hudson River, they come down, they pick up about 10% from the Croton Reservoir, they go right by our seminary, they go to Van Cortlandt Park, they go down 170 feet, they go to water mains, they go to water pipes, they go to water faucets, but if in the last 6 inches it goes through a plastic tube, for some reason we call this hydration. What happened? Was this magic? It was water in the Delaware. It was water in the aqueduct. It was water in the water main. It was water in the water faucet. It's water. That's all it is. Water going through a plastic tube. So it's not artificial. It is assisted hydration. You're drinking water through a plastic tube. You're using an artificial means, but you're not consuming some artificial invention. And often this is also the case with the nutrition as well. Sometimes they talk about ensure. Some people take that to diet. Some people take it to jog. Some people take it to do all sorts of things. But simply because it goes through a plastic tube does not change the nature of the thing. So we want to be careful with the words here. And the other thing in this area, which is absolutely crucial, because the Holy Father gave a talk on the 20th of March of this year. It was a conference at the Vatican just on the status of people in a persistent vegetative state. That's a relatively new term, since about 1968. In modern medicine, there are about 5 comas, 2 of which deleteriously quickly lead to death, 2 of which you can come out of pretty quickly, but one of them where you kind of get stuck, where someone doesn't get very much better or very much worse, which since 1968 some people have called a persistent vegetative state. It's not exactly the same as a coma, but it's very close to it. They go through wake cycles and sleep cycles and some other things. We don't know what they feel, we don't know what they understand. Sometimes it does lead, many times it leads to death, but sometimes it doesn't. Some guy, because he got a little Valium, came out of it once, and another dentist who gave someone a little Novocaine came out of it. We don't understand some of these things. But one of the things the Pope pointed out there was tremendously correct. First of all, he said, we must always remember that we're talking about a patient, not a vegetable. Because when you use that terminology, persistent vegetative state, you're referring to a human being whose functions are so minimal, you might call them vegetative. But remember, there are no vegetables in a hospital. Vegetables are in the EMP. It is someone whose functions have been reduced, but not a vegetable. It's a person. It's another one, like you and me, made in the image and likeness of God, who doesn't happen to be functioning too well. If you want, the better term would be unconscious rather than vegetative. Because I think it often happens. You see it sometimes when we go to war. You saw it in World War II, you saw it in Vietnam. Instead of talking about Japanese brothers and sisters or citizens, we call them Japs or Nips. Or we come up with these short-term insulting terms because we don't feel so bad about killing someone if we call it something else or call them something mean. So we got to watch out for the language, okay? And that's true in this area too. But the thing that I think constantly gets lost in this area, because there is some controversy within the Catholic community, although since the Pope gave the talk on March 20th, I think one part of that controversy has just collapsed. Often they refer back to a declaration on euthanasia from the 5th of May, 1980. This is from the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith. At least in Catholic circles, that's the highest teaching authority in the Catholic Church, and it's always approved by the Pope. This is not a liberal document, it's not conservative, this is the doctrine of our faith. If someone were to ask me, what is it that the Catholic Church teaches on euthanasia, this is what the Catholic Church teaches on euthanasia. And in the dispositive part of this document, there is a very important sentence toward the end, which has been misused by some, but correctly defended by others. And we have to pay attention to this sentence carefully, which says, when inevitable death is imminent, now each word counts there, inevitable death is imminent. When inevitable death is imminent, in spite of the means used, it is permitted in conscience to take the decision to refuse forms of treatment that would only secure precarious and burdensome prolongation of life, so long as the normal care due to the sick person in similar cases is not interrupted, period. That's a mouthful. But when inevitable death is imminent, it's very, very important. Because when you come to these cases, one of the big things that you got to figure out is, are we talking about a dying patient or a non-dying patient? Like at Celtic, we know they're dying. They already have advanced cancer. I mean, if they can profit by new chemotherapy or something that's long tethering, well, they go back there and try it. What we do is we end up with the patients where they tried that and it didn't work, and they're dying. So we just provide what we call palliative care, pain relief. We don't do super-duper operations. We don't do any operations. We just do what I suggested before. You relieve pain, you take care of hunger, thirst, you keep someone clean. All right? They're dying patients. Almost everything can become extraordinary in that context, because if death is around the corner, like 2 days away, and in moral theology when we say when inevitable death is imminent, imminent is measured in terms of hours and days. Imminent doesn't mean you have a year to live. That's not it. Imminens in Latin means it's about to drop, it's about to fall. So it's taken in a highly proximate sense. You know? When inevitable death is imminent, in spite of the means used, it is permitted in conscience to take decisions that refuse the forms of treatment that only... Okay, so there are, when inevitable death is imminent, when it's clear that the person is dying from some other pathology, many, many things become extraordinary and therefore non-obligatory. But this would be the nub of one of the problems with the Chiago case. I mean, she was in an accident, I think, in 1992. Something like that, 1992, 1994, I'm not sure that. Obviously, she's not a dying patient. Now, of course, if you don't provide food and nutrition, or nutrition and hydration, then you have set in motion a chain of effects, which we know is death dealing. I mean, that's not religion, that's biology. If you don't eat, you don't drink water, you're not going to live. And that's why we have to be very careful about whether we're talking about a dying situation or the non-dying. Secondly, we always have to go case by case. You have to pay attention to the clinical facts and be very careful about what I call creative definitions, which end up dealing people out of the human race. Back in 1978, Daniel Callahan, who ran that Hastings Institute, came up with the following exuberant description, what he called biologically tenacious individuals. Biologically tenacious individuals. You know who they are? They're not dying fast enough. Then the late Father McCormick, Richard McCormick, spoke about these cases toward the end when you are supporting, quote, merely physiological existence. Merely physiological existence. What's that? Sounds like you're putting gas in the tank or something. It sounds like you're boiling a machine. You would forget you're talking about a human being. Because when your physiological existence happens to be separated from your spiritual existence, that's what we call death. Finally, Father Kevin O'Rourke, who's caused all the problem in this area, speaks of your cognitive affirmative function. He says the goal in life is to live so that eventually you live with God. I agree. It was the first answer in the catechism when I was a little kid. He argues, though, that if you reach the point where you have lost this ability of your cognitive affective is spelled with an A here, he said in those cases then feeding is not a human benefit. Uh-oh. If you notice, every sexy court case has involved someone who is cognitively impaired. Cognitively impaired. They either cannot communicate or are unable to communicate, and that's not the same as saying whether they're dying or not dying. I don't have an argument in the true context of a truly dying patient. And then you do palliative care, comfort care, pain relief, and minimal needs. I mean, I think you owe everybody food, water, bed rest, room temperature, and personal hygiene simply because they're human beings. In fact, if you do those at home, you don't call them medical procedures. And according to the U.S. Office for the Assessment of Technology, there are 11,000 citizens in this country at home today using feeding tubes. And someone in the family has been trained to take care of them, to clean them, and to handle them. It's not necessarily. Now, their insertion has to be in a medical institution, but be that as it may. But we've got to be careful with those creative terminology, because what you're doing is you're defining some folks out. And that lurks back to the danger where we were before. Once you put a functional standard on life, then some of us are going to qualify and some ain't. And that's the danger. In paragraph 23 of the Gospel of Life, the Pope outlined what he called a clash. That there's a clash going on between the culture of life and the culture of death. And this clash is going on basically in the first world, not the third world. This is, remember, who has legalized euthanasia? Not the third world, but the Netherlands, and now Catholic Belgium has legalized euthanasia. These are not poverty countries. These are not third world countries. These are countries that have the same standard of living that we do. And this is unfortunate. And when the Pope wrote in paragraph 23 that there really is a collision going on between the traditional defense of the individual worth of human beings, and simply because you are a human being, you deserve respect, generosity, and service. That is being replaced by a different standard, where human life is judged by its efficiency, functionality, and usefulness. Efficiency, functionality, and usefulness. Now, the New Republic, which is not a mouth organ for the Vatican, and the Nation magazine, when that encyclical came out, I was amazed that these are publications that don't like John Paul II, and they don't like a lot of things that he teaches, but none of them said he was wrong. That there was a clash going on between a culture of life, which, because it is human life, we believe it deserves respect, generosity, and service, as against measuring human life in terms of efficiency, functionality, and usefulness. As soon as you and I or anyone else starts to measure each other in terms of our efficiency, our functionality, or our usefulness, sooner or later, we're all in trouble, friends. Someone is going to make the value judgment that you're not so useful or you're more trouble than you're worth. This is how we judge things. Now, we have been accused of everything in the world. we Americans. No one has ever accused us of being philosophers. And we are not philosophers. We are pragmatic people. We are pragmatic down to our utilitarian genes. The question that counts in our society is normally first, does it work? And the second question is, what does it cost? I don't know if you ever saw that thing with Kenneth Clark on the history of civilization. And at the end of it, chapter 15, they're finally coming across the New York harbor, and you see the big buildings, and the overvoice says, the question of the Middle Ages was, is this the will of God? The question of modern America is, does it work? That's how we judge everything, by its usefulness. And this is where we have to be careful at the other end of life. This is what I meant it before when I said, I'm not here to insult doctors or nurses or any healthcare providers. But they're not going to call the shots. The ones who will call the shots in this society are those who are probably vice presidents in insurance companies, who are going to turn on the faucet of reimbursement or perhaps turn it off. Again, no one is arguing, and no one should argue, that you do all things, all times, under all circumstances for all people. That is an impossible standard. No one holds that standard, and it's not even ethical. But we should provide what is ordinary and leave what is extraordinary to individual choices. That is conventional ethics, that's conventional morality, it's perfectly legal, and it's very good medicine. And that's what we should try to honor. So, I suppose I shouldn't say it, because to some extent I think at the beginning of life, the issues are probably clear enough. Sooner or later, I think someone makes up their mind on what they're going to do to try to support life, and or maybe pretend that there's no problem. At the other end of life, I think unless you make a couple of important distinctions, it is easy to become confused. And I think even good people can become confused. Remember, the forces of euthanasia are counting on your confusion. Do not be confused. There is nothing to apologize for. We're not coming up with some crazy scruple that makes no sense. We're talking about good morals, good medicine, and good law. Those distinctions that I outlined are well grounded in medicine, they're well grounded in law, but some people want to muddy it up. And we don't have to make it all negative. But everyone seems to know what the Catholic Church is against. And it's also important that we point out what we're for, and the supporting alternatives. More than once I have mentioned Calvary Hospital, we should also mention Rosary Hill. There are alternatives. There are caring alternatives of people who know what they're doing, they know how to take care of dying patients. Because everybody's afraid of pain. We know that. Everybody's afraid of dying because it's something you haven't done yet. Most other things, you've done them once or twice, and you can handle it again. This one, you only get one shot. And we're afraid of it. You know, you may not be afraid of death, but everyone's afraid of dying. Now, and that can be funny. You know, doctors and lawyers, doctors and nurses are running around confused. They don't know what to do. Hey, that's not true. That's not true. Good doctors and nurses know what they're doing. They know how to take care of patients. They know how to take care of dying patients. There's a proper way to do it. So that through help and assistance and volunteer work, we should support all the right alternatives. Because it seems to me we got from the Supreme Court, when they ruled on June 26, 1997, we got a timeout. I mean, it looked from, if you just read the headlines, it looked like, well, finally, the pro-lifers got a little victory. No, we got a timeout. The euthanasia movement has not stopped. But we got a reprieve. And it got flipped back to some states to let them function as social laboratories and work out whatever they can work. But we have to use the time we have, A, not to get confused, so that we don't become unwitting participants in a movement that our country doesn't need. And B, we have to do the positive things. We've got to help out in positive ways. I'm not here to tell anyone what to do, but I am here to tell everyone's got to do something. Maybe you visit people, fine. Maybe you visit people who have no visitors, fine. Maybe you write good letters to the editor, fine. Maybe you take a trip. Maybe you carry a banner, fine. Some people like to do that, some people don't think that's classy. I don't care what they think. You do whatever you can with whatever you've got as long as you're able. Then we'll come back where Mr. Hyde was quoting not only Fulton Sheen, but actually he was quoting Pope Pius XI. And it's the same quote that also goes so very well with the nun I knew well, Mother Teresa, Blessed Teresa. She pointed out, you don't have to win. You don't have to win right now. But you must be found faithful. So whether we win, or whether we get this law, or we don't get that law, good laws, bad laws, we're never going to fix anything unless we know good people. And that takes a good society. And that means we're all called to do whatever you can, with whatever you got, as long as you're able. But who remembers? Who remembers? Go to Isaiah 49. Remember that citation in Isaiah 49, where it says, even if your mother forgets you, I will never forget you, says the Lord, because I have carved your name right here in the palm of my hand. That's not me, that's God speaking. So, who tracks the letters, who tracks the process, who tracks, sometimes you're going to a Catholic school and you're about as welcome as a leper. Half the rest of the human race thinks you're a nut. Doesn't bother me, I am a nut. Doesn't bother me. Sometimes you're not too welcome in other circles. Fine. But who remembers all the flack? Who cares? God will remember. Because he has written your name right there in the palm of his hand, which is a good place to be.
Can't get better than that. Just before that talk, I wanted to just be here for a second. Just up top here. He left something here.
Based on what I made, we have a plaque here for you. This is a plaque that has the
I just want to see what you're making up.
this I'm not making up. This is a plaque with the Congressman Henry Hyde's quotation on it, and it's also engraved with a plaque saying to Monsignor William B. Smith, in grateful appreciation for his eloquence, persistence, and courage in speaking out as a voice for the voiceless, and in protecting and enhancing the sacredness of all human life.
I just want to thank Monsignor. I'd like to thank our honored honorees. Just for Monsignor talked about a little bit about the healthcare proxy. One of the holders over here have healthcare proxies that are put out by the New York State Catholic Conference. They're the ones that are the approved type, not the living wills. And you know, you can walk out of here right now, get hit by a truck, and not be able to make a decision. Do you have a healthcare proxy? Again, as Monsignor said, don't get a living will, get a healthcare proxy. There's also lots of other life issue type information over here, and also over here, there's also information on Rosary Hill.